And so whenever I was in the classroom, specifically in 11th and 12th grade, I had a lot of very angsty adolescents going, I don't want to do this. Like, this is not what I'm into. I don't like reading. You can't make me like reading. And so, of course, I'm like, challenge accepted. And so in pursuing a way to meet those kids in the middle, I started dabbling a little bit with podcasts specifically. So just kind of curiosity, like, are y'all podcast listeners? Do you have podcasts that you like? Have you ever listened?
Brandy Dieter says no. What about you, Anne? Anne, if you're talking to us, your mic's off. Okay, Anne must not be talking to us. I love the idea of listening to podcasts in the car.
Yes.
And I know we've got quite a few folks that, especially the folks that drive from Decatur north or, so I was blessed to go hang out with Miss Brandy Dieter for a year, at least once a week. And so I could listen to some podcasts, but mostly it was Sirius Radio. And now I am 4 miles from work. So yeah. I'm usually, sending a text message and reading my email while I drive the 7 minutes.
That doesn't sound very safe.
No, it's not very safe. But
if I said I don't listen to podcasts, it's probably because I don't know what I'm doing or what I'm listening to or what it is. So it's not that I don't want to use it. I'm just not familiar with it.
I think that's kind of the case for a lot of people. When I got turned on to podcast, it was because somebody on Twitter, an author that I really liked, was mentioning, hey, like when I was writing, this is a podcast that I love listening to. And so I kind of had to figure it out on my own just to kind of see what it was. But what we're going to talk about today, hopefully you feel a little bit more comfortable just with the concept itself and kind of how to get into podcasts. How would you even know what to listen to or what to click and all of that stuff. So we're just going to talk about like the nature of podcasts. Why would that be a good tool to engage either our struggling readers or our kids that just kind of have this negative feeling towards reading in general, and how podcasts can even be great for your hearing impaired, visually impaired kids. So one big thing for literacy right now is this nice little buzzword of what multimodal means. All of our literacy people looking at the new standards that are coming out next year, it talks about multimodal text a lot, and TEA has not given us a definition of what that means. And so for me, multimodal is where I'm looking at one text, but it's reaching me in a lot of different areas. So maybe I'm able to see something whilst also listening to something, and there might be a visual. And so like all these different pieces, well, podcasts can meet that multimodal aspect. A lot of the podcasts that I listen to personally, they put transcripts online. And so you have the scripted out version of what the podcast looks like. So you can follow along, you can read along while you're listening. I know a lot of podcasts also do a lot of graphic design pieces where they create supplemental images that go with the different episodes. So there's all different facets of listening, seeing, and interacting. That's pretty cool. So I think that that's one reason why, just to kind of be open to the idea. Hang on, my screen's freezing up. Another great thing about podcasts is that they're free. And so, excuse me, I'm fighting the bronchitis. One big issue I know for me as a teacher was just getting texts for my kids. And so when I had my struggling readers and I'm like, I have ideas of what they might like, that's going to cost me either money out of my pocketbook when I go to Half Price Books to try to buy books for the classroom library. But sometimes you want something really, really quick on the fly. And I don't have an unlimited budget to buy supplies. So I love that podcasts are free. And as long as you have an internet connection, you can access them from school or wherever. Another great thing too is that you can access them 24/7. So like my students had one-to-one technology. And so even those that didn't have internet at home, they could download episodes while they were at school during lunch or during passing period or whatever. They could download it to their phone, and then our kids had Chromebooks, so they could put on their Chromebook, and then they could go home and listen. I had kids that were telling me that when they would get hooked on an episode, they would go home and like while they were doing their chores or while they were at work sweeping the floor in the back of the whatever, they were listening. And so it was really cool that they were able to access those pieces all hours of the day, anytime that they wanted to. So podcasts, that's a really great feature, is that there's 24/7 access there. I think another piece is that you can listen to podcasts at your own pace. I know for a lot of our kids in class, we have to reread, right? Like, and sometimes that looks like a whole chunk of text at a time, and I want to go back, and sometimes that looks like a tiny little piece. And so that's what's great about when I'm listening to podcasts, there's the little fast forward 15 second, rewind 15 second. I can listen to that same loop as many times as I need to in order to access what I need. But I also think, and I don't know if I put a slide in here for this or not, it's such a great equalizer for kids. So if I have, and I'm thinking specifically, I had a creative writing class last year where I had people who were avid readers, top of the class, like A student, I love to read. And then I had kids that were like, my counselor put me in this class because it was the only one that fit my schedule, and I haven't read a book since 2008. So, but then they could both be listening to the same podcast and they could be talking to each other. And I think that that's such a great community builder, because even though my high achiever, whatever, could be, I listen once and I get it, this other kid who maybe had to listen a few times at home, they're still able to come back to class and be like, what did you think about episode 6? And so then there's that commonality of being in that common text that makes it accessible to kids at all different levels, which is really, really neat. And there's really no, way for other kids to know whether you had to go back and re-listen or whatnot. So I think it's great for that pacing piece. What a lot of people don't realize, especially if you're new to podcasts in general, there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of podcasts to choose from, kindergarten all the way up through adulthood. And so when we're looking at multiple genres of text, I think it's a great way to pair something like, if you are doing a nonfiction piece, you could find poetry in a podcast form of somebody reading poetry out loud that could connect to the topic. And it's a great way for kids to be able to make textual connections without having to add the added pressure of sitting and reading yet another piece. So it's a good way to kind of ease into that idea of making those cross-textual, is that a word? Cross-textual connections?
Sure it is.
It is now.
And I know, is that still an area on STAR where our kids struggle, and a lot of times the STAR people, the people that write STAR will choose some piece of text and pair it with poetry, and our kids think poetry is yucky usually.
Yes.
So
it's cool, and I'll share a couple of poetry resources on here, but I just feel like, again, it's taking some of that pressure off. So if I can focus all of my energy into reading this one excerpt of text, and I don't have to add to my plate as a struggling reader of decoding and processing, where I can just listen to this other piece and focus on the connection and not the decoding aspect of it, that's really, really helpful for me. So, yeah. And so on the iTunes, like I listen through all my podcasts through iTunes. You can go on and you can search for all the different categories, all of the different genres. This was just a screenshot of my podcast store the other day when I took a picture of it, but there's so many different ones. And I like to kind of talk to my kids about what genres look like in things other than books. Because as an adult, that was something that I'd never heard of, an audio drama, until I started listening to these. So kind of talking about what that looks like, and that genres aren't just limited to the books on a bookshelf. It's kind of a fun conversation to have. So let's see. I want to talk through, and again, some of these are secondary, but these would be when I look at my standards that I used in teaching, and I kind of look 6th through 12th grade at some of the genres that we're wanting, or TEA wants us to expose kids to. And I tried to find a couple of podcasts to pair with those things. So in the 11th grade classroom, I talked a lot about literary nonfiction. And this was a genre that my kids, just as a whole, they could not stand. Like, they hated it, because if I looked at my textbook, it was excerpts from like Of Plymouth Plantation by William Bradford. And it was like all of this historical stuff. There was a lot of like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, which I love as an English person. But my 16-year-old struggling readers are like, I really don't care what happened at Walden Pond, miss. Like, that's just not, it's not what I care about. So these two podcasts are really great for that literary nonfiction piece. Serial, if you guys have heard of Serial, it was like this pop culture phenomenon where podcasts became popular. And it's basically a journalist who opens up a murder conviction and starts going through and reinvestigates the crime and interviews people, and it's factual. And because of this podcast, the man in question actually got a new trial. And so he's able, like, it was really, really cool to hear somebody who was just kind of doing this as a project, and now.
And would that be appropriate for middle school?
Maybe some pieces of it, like the very beginning. I think it would be an interesting listen as far as like as a mentor text, even for writing, when you're talking about how to introduce something true in an entertaining way. You could probably use excerpts and pieces of that for sure. I don't know that the full content of like the murder part would be appropriate for middle school. But yeah, I used it with my 17-year-old kids. And then This American Life is kind of the overarching, the bigger company that Serial came from. And they do just random interest stories. And there's several podcast episodes on that one that would be middle school appropriate. So some of them are just about like a personal experience that somebody had. And then there was like a story about, hey, this house has seen 2,000 years of people living in it. And let's talk about what that looks like. And it's like taking stories all across America and broadcasting them out. So that's kind of neat. And I think this would be a fun one to use where kids could listen to an episode and then kind of create something of their own modeled after the style about their own life and their experiences, which is a really neat thing. So any questions about those two? These are just like some of the ones that I know.
It reminds me of the old Paul Harvey.
Yeah. It's This American Life is very similar to the rest of the story, Paul Harvey. So
Caty's probably not even old enough to remember Paul Harvey.
Well, you won't like it, but it's because my grandpa listened to it. So yeah. These are my favorites, are the drama and the fake documentary. These are the ones that really hooked my kids. And so again, I would never let a kid listen to something that I hadn't previewed before, but these are all created as fiction and they're dramatized. So Welcome to Night Vale, it's like a mock radio show of this man who is talking about daily occurrences in the town. And they're very unusual, and there's a whole lot of like alien aspect to them. The bright sessions are like pretend therapy sessions. So it's a therapist talking to a person on the other end of the couch, but they're atypical. So they have like superpowers. The language in that one is a little adult for middle school. And then The Truth is like a different story every time, where it's like this investigator and he's trying to solve a puzzle. And so kind of along the same lines of that one, if I can get my computer to cooperate. Just kind of the plain fiction. All three of these are like mockumentary style. So when you listen to them, they sound very, very real, but they are not. And most of these are like sci-fi thriller, but one of them is solving like an alien mystery. One of them is solving paranormal mysteries. And then the other is about a whole town disappearing. So these three, I picked these because these are the ones that my kids got addicted to and they always wanted to talk to me about. And I still have kids like texting me sending me tweets that have graduated. And they're like, oh, miss, did you see that this is coming out with this new season? So we're still talking about those podcasts. These are the ones that my kids loved.
And are any of those, are those pretty adult?
These are more high school.
Okay.
So poetry, this would be a great one. And again, I would kind of pick and preview. So the one on the right, Poem of the Day, is actually from the Poetry Foundation. So they do one poem, and some of them are more classic, and then some of them are more contemporary. But they pick a poem every day and they read it aloud and then they talk about it. The Poetry Gods and Poetry Project, those are really great for contemporary current writers. And specifically the Poetry Gods, when we talk about like the cultural equity conversation, they do a really good job of trying to find people or poets and poetry that touch on the bigger conversations that are happening with our kids of all cultures, gender, everything. And I really like that. I use that a lot with my 11th and 12th grade. You would just want to kind of look through the episodes and preview the poetry. It's not going to be very long, but I'm sure that there's a wide variety to choose from.
So great way to connect to maybe current events, news, articles. So a poem with news.
Well, and I think too, especially when we're talking about our kids who hate to read, one of the big, most important conversations that I'm having with teachers right now is that kids need to see themselves in text. They need to listen, whether they're listening to an audiobook or reading a book or whatever, like they need to have opportunities to see people who look like them, to see people who have similar life situations, and to connect. Because when we don't have that opportunity, we start to feel like other and less than. And so I think that the more opportunities that we can provide our kids to hear people speaking from their life experiences that might connect to their own life experiences, that's such a powerful piece, not only for getting them to want to read and motivating them, but just to be able to see themselves as someone who is
normal.
Normal, yes, absolutely. Because I think we live in a really great time where those conversations are being had and are being accepted in classrooms. And so having, as a teacher, being able to provide those opportunities is just such a community builder with your kids. So I kind of looked through, So I kind of looked through some of the skills that I would use a normal piece of text, a book, a short story, something like that to teach. And I just kind of wanted to throw those out there and just kind of talk through a couple of them because these would all be activities or skills that I would want my students to be able to do. And you can do all of these things and teach all of these concepts using podcasts and not just text. So is there anything like looking at that? Is there anything that you kind of want to hear about, or you want to hear how I would use those or how you could use those with podcasts in your classroom?
So Brandy, when you look at those skills, what is the biggest struggle for the kids that you're working with currently, besides the I don't want to read it?
Right. For my grade level, it's either main idea or summarizing or making predictions. Being able to infer and make predictions, for sure.
I think one fun thing that you can do, kind of when I was talking about the multimodal piece, a lot of podcasts come with supplemental imaging. So you could definitely have students look at the image that is attached to an episode and make predictions about like even the genre. So based on the colors that I see and based on the images that are used in the middle of the screen, like based on the words on the screen, what do I think that this episode might be about? Does it look like it's going to be suspenseful or spooky? Does it look like it's going to be funny, and why? And so I think that would be a great making predictions piece. And I think as far as summarizing main idea, the power of being able to re-listen is such a great thing. So if you have a 20-minute episode, then you can even time it out and say like every X amount of minutes, we're going to kind of write on a sticky note. I used to do a thing called boxes and bullets, where I would have them box what they thought the main idea of that chunk was and then put supporting details under bullets. And then we could put our sticky notes beside each other and kind of see, does it make sense when I'm looking at this start to finish? Does it seem like I captured anything? Did I leave anything out? And so it makes it a little bit more manageable when they're able to re-listen. Any other questions?
And anything that specifically that your hearing impaired kids struggle with
Everything.
Yeah. Yes.
And really, honestly, I mean, I'll just lay it out there. Podcasts are probably not the best way to reach a hearing impaired kid. However, I do, for some kids who have more hearing than others, who can hook into their devices, they can access. So it's more kids that are in like itinerant situations that are fully mainstream. They might be able to access them. One of the things that I know, this is just a personal story. My son has ADHD, and reading is not his favorite thing to do because you have to be still. You have to attend to a page for a long period of time. And there's just far too many other things that he would rather be doing that capture his attention more than a book does. However, I have found that a lot of times if he's reading a selection he's in high school now, we don't do that as much anymore, but when he was in elementary school and he was doing all the AR stuff and whatnot, I would download books for him and he would listen to the book while he read the text. So he was getting two different kinds of input. He was getting the visual input and he was getting the auditory input. But one of the things a byproduct that I didn't expect that makes complete sense now that I saw it happen was that as he was listening, when he was listening to the book and reading, it forced him to slow down because he was trying to rush through the text. And so that forced him to kind of slow down and pay more attention to what he was doing instead of just trying to get from point A to point B in the least amount of time. And so he was able, and because he was also getting the auditory input, he was able to understand the text better and remember what it was that he wrote, because his issue was he was reading and he could read the words and he could understand the words, and then he'd go to take the test and he would forget what it was that he read.
Yeah.
Which, don't even get me started on AR, but
right.
That was a nice byproduct.
Well, I think too, what's really cool about, like, I hear exactly what you're saying. And we did a training where we were talking about podcasts a little bit, and somebody brought up that this would be like a great quote unquote gateway drug for reading, is that if I get hooked on a type of story that maybe wasn't accessible to me before as a struggling reader, and I want more and I want more and I want more, then eventually we might get to that point where I'm like, if you like these, I have a book for you that I think that you might really like. And I think too, with podcasts, there's so much like I don't want to say cinematic. What's the audio version of cinematic? Words are hard. Anyway, but the production value of, you hear sound effects and you hear music. And so I think there's so many other enhancements that can really help kids understand the idea of tone and message and all of those different pieces, which aren't present when you're still struggling to decode words. It's really hard to paint the picture in your mind when you're reading. And that's my husband. He's a big podcast guy, and he has undiagnosed, I think, ADD. He can read for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then it's gone. That sustained focus, we really, really struggle. And so that's one thing for him, is he would just rather be able to listen to it and process it that way. And I will tell you, I'm going to show a tool here in a minute that I think kind of evens the playing field for not all the way, but it's a great tool to kind of be able to connect your kids to podcasts through video and captioning, which is really nice. So I just want to share a couple of tools with y'all that I think are great, that really meet that idea of helping our kids become better listeners and processing, listening, speaking, all of that fun stuff. So one of those is called ListenWise. And ListenWise is a website that basically has taken different news articles and has created 10 minutes or less podcasts about current events, and it connects to all different content. So I can go on listenwise.com and create a free account, and I'm able to access, I could look at math, and then I could narrow it down to whatever grade level it is. And then there's all of these little micro podcasts about those topics. And then within that, I have discussion questions that could go with it, and I have an assessment. So, and that's a whole other day to talk about, like, assessing all the time. But I think that that's a really cool way just to add that supplement to whatever you're learning. There's social studies, science, math, and ELAR, and it's all grade level. So I really love it. There's the paid version that you can get a little bit more of like the data tracking piece, But with the free, you can still have access to all of the different pieces. And then you can also download the written out typed version of the material as well. So I really like that. It comes with images too that can help you make those connections. So I love ListenWise. It's a really great resource. Another thing that I think is great is a lot of people who podcast, they love, like the two people on the screen right there, both of them have been involved in education in some way. They're storytellers. And so because of the nature of podcasting, their schedule is a little bit more flexible. I reached out to my kids' two favorite podcast creators. Within a day, they had responded and we were able to Skype with them. And so I think this was a really cool way to bring learning to life for my students. They created interview questions, and they were able to see that storytelling or creating something like that is something that could be accessible to them, that you don't have to be this like up here, great writer, great everything to be able to tell a story. And so that was a really great encouragement to my students when they were able to have those conversations, and we recorded those on Skype. We put it on, we were using Canvas at the time for the kids that couldn't be there. But I think that's a really neat thing because, I mean, I could reach out to a lot of different authors and probably never hear anything back because you have to go through a publisher.
Yep.
But this was a simple tweet. I tweeted them and said, hey, would you want to talk to some angsty high school kids about your podcast? And they were like, yes, I would love to do that. So it was really, really fun. So I want to share with you a really neat tool because kids creating podcasts, it's such a fun way to help them tell a story. And it's something that sounds really overwhelming and fancy, but it's very easy and it's very accessible to all different kids. So there's an app called Anchor. And you can use the web-based tool or you can use the app. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the app, or sorry, click on the URL. Everything about Anchor is free. So no matter how fancy that you get, it's free. And so I use it on my phone. And when you use it on your phone, it's very visually friendly, looks like this. And you can create a free account and you can go on and you can record your voice or record an episode. There's background music that you can put to it. There's sound effects that you can put to it. And it's very simple, like dragging and moving, nothing complicated. Like if I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out. I tend to be a little dumb when it comes to the editing piece of fanciness. So, but there's also great articles and resources there about how to get started. And I taught myself how to do it probably less than an hour, just kind of looking through. But when we were doing a workshop, when Linda was attending a training that I was doing, I was able to record a mini snippet of an episode in less than 1 minute. And so what's great about Anchor is just besides the free piece, if you use the URL, and this is where, Anne, I think that you'll like this. If you use the web-based version, it will create a video version of your podcast where it has all of the words and it highlights the words as it's recorded. And so then you can go in and if you want to edit it, you can. But when I'm thinking about like having that inclusive project in a class, that something like this might make it so that your hearing impaired kids still feel like they can participate and not have to do something alternative in the assignment, that they might have a way to be able to quote unquote like listen in that means. So I really, really like it.
Caption?
Yes. Or no, the actual, it's not just on the bottom. The words are the focus of the video. And it's like it adds some animation to it as well. And it highlights each word as you go. So it looks like, I can't recall, my husband recorded one for me just to show me, but it's in the video screen. The words are very large font in the middle, and there's different animations moving in and out, and you hear the podcast, but you're also seeing the words animate flying on the screen.
Okay. Simultaneously while the podcast is going?
Yeah. So it's pretty neat, and especially like creating something like that, you can, a lot of people, like a lot of the actual podcasts on iTunes, they're moving to use Anchor so that they're able to create more accessible tools for their listeners. My husband has a podcast through Anchor, and it's through iTunes. And so I think when we're talking about that idea too, with writing about publishing and sharing, we want to give our kids opportunities to have those authentic publication tasks where it's not just me, the teacher, seeing what they're doing. And so that could be something as simple as talking through, I researched this topic and I want to tell you about it. We did in our training, we had people find a poem that they liked, and they could put music to it based on what they thought would be appropriate music. And they read their poem aloud. So it would be a great way when you're doing guided reading to talk about fluency, and kids could record themselves reading and listen back and hear the fluency, or, hear their different like inflection pieces. So I love Anchor. I think it's such a great tool when we're talking about creating a podcast. And I actually did kind of a project-based learning activity with my kids where they created an outline for what a season of their idea would look like. And then they took one episode and they wrote the script and they produced it. And then we had like a listening party. So it was really, really fun and very creative. So very versatile tool.
And did you get a lot of investment in the writing?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Where, getting kids to revise more than one time, it's like, oh my goodness, we're never done. Like, you did it once, but we're going back. These kids were wanting to push back recording day over and over because they're like, we're just not ready. Like, we're not ready. We want to run through it one more time. We want to go through and, okay, we're going to do like a live read and we're going to fix it on the fly. So they were so invested in the wanting it to be a quality piece because it's something that they would feel proud of and want to share out, that they were begging for opportunities to revise and edit, which as a teacher, I'm like, oh, so beautiful.
And I know fluency is one of the biggest with our struggling readers. Fluency is just hard to tackle. And so there is quite a bit of research behind. I know Tim Rosinski has done some action research on pairing the video with the audio.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the power of being able to create those paired opportunities for kids easily.
I think too, kind of piggybacking on what we were talking about a minute ago about like the idea of seeing yourself in a text, is what I found with my kids, and I can imagine that this is, or I find it to be true with middle school, intermediate school, is you have kids that feel very, very passionate about a lot of things, but they feel like they're too young to have a voice in those things. And so what's really neat is having the conversation where it's like, there are ways that you can have your voice be heard. And that's why a lot of people create podcasts, is they have an idea, they have something that they want to talk about. They don't have a whole lot of people in their life to talk about it with. And so they create a podcast, and it's a way to record, to record themselves talking, to have conversations with different people. And then when they share it out, they're inviting other people to be a part of that conversation as well. And so this was a really fun kind of way to show kids that there's more than one way to use your voice and to have it be heard. And if you feel passionately about something, there are tools available to you. You don't have to wait until it's your job to be able to pour in and to explore and to research. So if I have a kid who's passionate about, maybe his mom is working 2 jobs and struggling with this language barrier because his mom doesn't speak English, and then he speaks more English than Spanish at school, and there's this whole thing, but he feels like there's nobody I can really talk to about that. Well, I can start researching what that looks like and kind of reaching out and saying, like, this is my experience as a bilingual person, and here are my thoughts, and here are some questions that I have. And it's a great way to find connections. When I share out, I can connect to other people that might be having some of those same struggles and same questions. So I think it's a really cool way to have kids be heard,
Okay, we have, we always end on time.
Perfect.
So we have 10-ish minutes. So I want to make sure that we get to cover all of your awesome tips and tricks.
Well, that was I wanted to end with Anchor just because I love that as a tool, but I kind of wanted to open it up just with whatever questions, just thinking through, like, your kids, the kids that you work with, what would be a question that you might have or an idea that you might have that I would be able to be a thinking partner with you about on how this might be a good tool for you.
So Brandy, what thoughts? I know the uniqueness of Lindsay is it's a very traditional community.
Okay.
They just have really great, awesome kids. Lots of farming, right? So is there a topic or a particular podcast that you can?
Well, I would, are there different subject areas? I mean, can you recommend, like, if I were to say we were focusing on science and I really needed my 5th grader to understand, are there different subject areas on the different podcasts?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, really anybody can create a podcast about anything. So when you go on iTunes, I think looking at reviews are really important, because the ones that are high quality, people will have provided feedback for that. But I could go tomorrow and record one episode and I could put it on iTunes and it would be there. So ListenWise, the website that I shared, would be a great place to start, because you can search for the curriculum piece of it. I want this to be 3rd grade science and maybe about the life cycle. And so then you can kind of see what they have there. Even just thinking about your community. I grew up in a very rural community as well. We were 360 people. I lived on lots of acres of land. And when I think about my experience as a student, I think one of the things that I wish I would have had access to as a kid, and I started going to school there in the 6th grade, I didn't really go to school with a whole lot of people that were different from me at all. And so I think that having podcasts that, like what we were talking about, even with poetry or nonfiction or whatever it is, but where you're giving kids an opportunity to be exposed to people with different ideas, people who come from different places, it can really expand that worldview for a lot of your kids who might not be around anyone that's different from them. So I think that that's a great use of it. But yeah, when you're searching, is thinking through like science, you could go on the nonfiction genre of iTunes. You can click on I think they have kid friendly, like a family or kid option in the podcast area. But I also suggest, like, make sure you give it a listen before, because like I said, anybody can put something on there. But ListenWise is a little more monitored and a little more filtered.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it looks really simple once you showed it to me on iTunes and how to, access it. I think it'll be great.
I think too, we are the best book recommender or text recommender for our kids. So even if you, just as not a teacher, but as a listener, like if you found a podcast that you liked, that you could kind of listen to and get a feel for, okay, like when we're talking about listening to episodes and seasons and that, like how do they pace that out so that you feel prepared to recommend the things to your kids as well? I think that's a great idea.
Okay. And after you brought it to my attention, I feel a lot better. My oldest son lives in Lubbock, and he drives back and forth to Texas Tech, and he'll come home, and I think that's what he listens to the whole way out in West Texas, because there's not a lot of reception out there. So
yeah,
share some information. Oh, I heard that on a podcast, and so I need to really start using it more.
It's great. For me, I prefer the fiction podcasts because it's entertainment, it's kind of mindless, and it's fun, and I don't have a lot of time to read mystery books, the things that I like to read, and so in the car when I drive, I listen to a lot of that. And then there's some really great professional development ones as well, like Penny Kittle, one of my favorite like literacy gurus. She has a great podcast about loving books, and so I listen to that sometimes when I don't have time to read. So it's just kind of a great way all around, regardless of what your interests are or why you like to read. There's lots of good stuff out there.
Anne, what about you? What questions might you have about podcasting?
I don't necessarily have a question, but you know how when you like learn a new word and then you hear that word like 4 times that day and you wonder if you've never even heard it before. Well, so today I'm driving to work, literally today. And normally I'm listening to KSCS, but NPR was on in my car from last night. And I was listening because they started talking about how educators are wanting to use more project-based learning. And I think they had about 5% of an understanding of really what project-based learning is. But regardless, okay, I'm like, fine, you can promote that. I'm good with that. But they mentioned that they have NPR has a podcast challenge going on right now. And it's for grades 5 through 12. And I'll put the link for it.
Oh, Ann, you just hit mute.
Didn't mean to hit mute. All right, I'm going to put the link in the chat box for the podcast challenge.
And I can add that to our online resources as well.
Yeah, and I'm assuming this is a national challenge. They said they were going to have one middle school winner, and middle school evidently includes 5th grade in this competition, and one high school winner, which sounds like the competition will be pretty steep, but it still might be something fun to get your kids to do if that's something that you're interested in, they might be interested in.
That is one thing that we love in our Lindsay area, or like anywhere, Wise County, Cook County, is a good challenge competition. Highly competitive. That's just how we roll. Right, Miss Dieter?
Well, yeah, so one of the digital learning coaches sent me a link to the NPR contest this morning, and I hadn't had a chance to look at it. I just had seen the title of it. I was like, oh, that's great. But NPR, they're doing a lot of really good stuff for kids. A lot of the Listen Wise podcasts, I think, are taken from or created by people from NPR. And so I think it's really cool that NPR as an organization, they're trying to find ways to make information accessible to all ages and all learning styles. And so I think that there's so much more to come in the future, which is really exciting.
So I am going to have you stop sharing.
Yes.
And am going to wrap us up here by taking us back to the AT webpage, because the blessing of having Caty join us, and I'll add, I don't think I have Listen Wise, and I know I don't have the NPR challenge. I'll add those two to our lunch bunch. But I didn't even have to beg Caty to be here. I just had to say, hey, would you? So this is, she said, she opened by saying this is a passion for her. So if there's anything that you need, her email address is on our lunch bunch page. Please reach out to her.
Yes.
She is new to the ESC, but she doesn't feel new.
Thanks.
So going to any last closing questions. Brandy, do you have any kiddos that you work with that are using alternative communication, talkers?
Yes, I have one student who's nonverbal. So she uses an iPad.
Okay, was she in 2nd grade? Is she probably in 4th or 5th grade now?
6th grade.
No. Wow, and a beautiful, beautiful young lady. So I do want to share
Chat on her iPad. She uses touch chat.
Okay, so I do want to share one opportunity with you. So the idea of spending 3 days in a professional development session does not appeal to me in any way, shape, or form. And one of those being a Saturday. And I went to, these ladies are called, it's a nonprofit, and they are Hear My Voice. So if you just Google Hear My Voice, AAC, and I'll put it in my AT newsletter.
Okay.
It looks like they've pared it down to a 2-day workshop. So when I attended in October, it was 3 days, and it was really a great thinking opportunity for me. I was very challenged in my thinking, and it was a great way to be hands-on. for using AAC and what that looks like in developing language. And it's very research-based. There is a fee that I couldn't tell you what it was, but the other really cool thing about the training was that it was parents, speech pathologists, teachers. So we were in there together. So that might be something that you recruit a parent or speech pathologist or one of your other partners to see if y'all could attend together. So it looks like they've announced some dates for the spring. I would highly recommend it. These ladies are both speech pathologists and have a passion for alternative communication, and they just really made it make sense for me. And because I know, I remember working with your young lady, and we just don't, it's not something that we do. So it's difficult and challenging to figure out what does that communication system look like. And they did a really great job. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I'll list those in the AT newsletter. Anything else for the good of the group?
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
I always enjoy spending my lunch bunch with Miss Brandy Dieter. All right. Y'all have a great week, and thank you so much for being here.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you, Katie.